The House shall rise. The House shall come to order.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the St Andrews Union Debating Society, the oldest and some might say finest of its kind. We are joined by some excellent speakers this evening for the motion, "This House opposes the rise of Tradwife influencers." On the proposition, we have Dr. Yu Sun and Isabel Sykes. And on the opposition, we have Nathan Bray and Abbie Lewis. Before we begin this debate, there are two orders of business. Firstly, we appreciate that this debate may touch on some sensitive subjects, and if anyone would like to step outside during the debate, I suppose there's the option to leave the hall entirely, but if you'd rather, we have a corridor through those doors where you can step out into, and you'll be attended on by the wonderful Matilda, one of our board members. Fantastic. And the second order of business is that I would like to invite the clerk of the House to read last week's minutes in the style of a Tradwife influencer.
Oh, my dear guests, I must get through these minutes quickly, as I have to tend to my pot roast that's in the oven.
Excuse me, what is this? It's the 21st century. Surely women belong in a debating hall.
Sure, but surely they can do both, right?
There seems to be some disagreement in the House. We will have to take a vote by oral acclamation. All those in favour of taking the minutes as read say aye. Aye. And all those against say nay. Nay! It seems rather close. I will have to consult my sergeant.
Aye.
The minutes are taken as read.
Aye.
If you tempt me enough. Without any further ado, I give the call to the first proposition speaker to give their address and defend the motion that stands in their name. Hear, hear.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm just going to give a kind of brief definition of Tradwife from the proposition's perspective before I kind of get into what we're seeing as some of the main harms of this ideology. So, Tradwife's an abbreviation of traditional wife, obviously, and a Tradwife is someone who, in our understanding, practices and advocates for a return to a heteronormative male breadwinner model of domesticity. So, this is where the husband goes out to work and the wife dedicates her own working day to homemaking and caring for her husband and children. And Tradwifism started as a community on YouTube and emerged around the 2016 US election of President Donald Trump. The increasing prevalence of these influencers in the wider social media sphere has since coincided with the rise of alt-right politics and the manosphere, which I'll come back to shortly. So while my colleague Dr. Sun will explain how Tradwifism is a global ideology with reach beyond the West, my focus today is this US political context within which Tradwifism emerged and its subsequent influence in UK contexts. So US and UK Tradwife influencers then, as we encounter them on Instagram and TikTok, present a specific aesthetic of feminine domesticity which privileges Western beauty standards. Tradwife influencers are nearly always thin, white and wealthy, with a meticulously curated feminine image, and some even dress in the style of 1950s housewives, so think aprons, coiffed hair, red lipstick, tea dresses, you get the picture. And the Tradwife lifestyle is nostalgic for a romanticised and crucially fictional past. It promotes female submission and subservience to male partners. Domesticity and feminine aesthetics are central. As the well-known British Tradwife Elena Petit said in a 2020 interview, this lifestyle is about, quote, submitting to and spoiling my husband like it's 1959. So with that kind of scene being set, I'll move on to perhaps the most obvious critique of Tradwifism, which is that the ideology is fundamentally sexist. In the past few years, we've seen a rise in so-called men's rights activist groups, movements such as Meninism and misogynistic influences like Andrew Tate in the online manosphere, accompanied by the increasing normalisation of violent misogyny on our screens and in popular discourse. And we're also seeing more broadly a huge shift to the right in US and UK politics, which has provided fertile ground for these movements to grow. Some academics have referred to the Tradwife movement as solving the problem of how to attract women into the manosphere, viewing Tradwives as the female equivalent of men's rights influencers, supporting their ideas about male dominance and female subservience from the woman's perspective. And while Tradwife ideology does promote essentialist gender norms and advocate for women's submission to men, the way in which they add fuel to the manosphere is often, I argue, more nuanced and sinister than just overt misogyny. Unlike men's rights activists, Tradwives don't view themselves as anti-women. In fact, they see themselves as a liberating force for women, or rather a very specific group of women. Theirs is an anti-feminist ideology, which sees women as having been harmed by modern feminism. They see themselves as offering an antidote to the oppression of workplace hustle culture, and the failures of a feminism that tells women to lean into it. This antidote is retreating into the home for those with the financial privilege to do so, and into the traditional gender roles of a mythical past. Tradwives therefore depict girl boss feminism as a key source of women's suffering, rather than the social and economic inequalities that underpin it. And turning away from all feminism towards a submissive femininity is the suggested solution. And this is how Tradwives sit within and help to bolster toxic manosphere discourse so successfully. They advocate for women's subservience to men not through their hatred of women, but through their professed concern to protect them from society's ills. Moving on to another common critique levelled at Tradwives, it's important to note that in some Tradwife influencer content, sexism functions as a gateway to white nationalism. Some researchers have referred to the movement as linking toxic masculinity with white supremacy, attaching a friendly feminine face to white male nationalism. The emphasis Tradwife influencers place on preserving so-called tradition and harking back to a mythical idyllic past can be reminiscent of both MAGA and British nationalist rhetoric. Critics have identified that some Tradwife influencers openly follow and interact with white nationalist accounts online and use their platforms to disseminate myths such as the Great Replacement theory. But, as with their support for manosphere discourse, I want to argue that Tradwife influencers' entanglement with these racist ideologies more often operates in less explicit and more insidious ways. The algorithmic nature of social media platforms such as TikTok enables Tradwives to conceal their alliances with white nationalist movements. They're able to replicate trending audio and hashtags and allow right-wing messages to spread to wider audiences through seemingly harmless viral memes and trends about marriage, parenting, and womanhood. Indeed, the feminine housewife aesthetic that epitomises Tradwife content shares so many similarities with the vast array of popular cooking and cleaning content online that the ideology is well disguised in a broad landscape of romanticised domesticity, which is on the rise. You may not be familiar with the self-proclaimed hardcore Tradwives of the alt-right, but you may have come across Hannah Neeleman of the Ballerina Farm, churning butter in her vast homestead with a herd of blonde children frolicking around her ankles and the stars and stripes flying from the front porch. Zooming out further, you may have watched Stacey Solomon tap to tidy, bought Mrs. Hinch-sponsored cleaning products, or applied the Marie Kondo technique to your cupboards. Housework and the housewife are back in a big way, and Tradwife ideology is at the epicentre. And so rather than explicitly promoting misogynistic or white nationalist views, most Tradwife influencers facilitate the spread of these messages by blending in with the broader social media landscape, presenting a seemingly harmless vision of domestic retreatism that appeals to audiences looking to feel comforted. And this brings me to my final point, which is the hypocrisy of Tradwife ideology. So, as I've discussed, Tradwives present retreating into the home as a solution to the damage done by a sexist work culture that submits women to the double shift, and the lean-in corporate feminism that fails to liberate women from it. Clinging to tradition is thus a response to a world in turmoil. We're living in a world where care is increasingly privatised, with the withdrawal of state welfare in Western capitalist states like the US and the UK. The care, health and well-being of individuals and families lies even more than usual with women. Leaving the labour market to retreat into the home and go back to imagined simpler times thus appears as an attractive survival mechanism, a way to withdraw, hunker down, and look after one's own amid economic crisis and socio-political upheaval. In this way, Tradwife ideology and this broader landscape of romanticised domesticity I've sketched out may be seen in some ways as a symptom of crisis rather than a cause. However, that doesn't make it any less harmful. And crucially, it's not as if Tradwife influencers are presenting realistic inspiration for taking care of a family in uncertain times. In fact, they're doing the opposite. Tradwives misrepresent a retreat into private domestic life as an idyllic alternative to an uncertain labour market. In their content, the strenuous reality of housework and care work is obscured by a false vision of the happy housewife. Through the careful use of editing techniques and curated appearances, the hard work involved in caring for a family and running a household is reduced to a seemingly easy, therapeutic, feminine pastime. Certainly, the romanticised lifestyles of Tradwife influencers bear no resemblance to the financial strain and time poverty that epitomises the double shift for working class women, particularly amid a cost of living crisis and a care crisis. Nor is the Tradwife lifestyle even a true reflection of the lives of the creators themselves, as despite professing to reject paid work, many successful Tradwife influencers are monetising their content on a large scale, even if this work often goes mysteriously unseen and unmentioned on their platforms. The result is that the fantasy of the housewife presented by Tradwife influencers actually serves to deny and devalue both women's paid and unpaid labour. To sum up then, while not all Tradwife influencers are manosphere proponents or white nationalists, their content undoubtedly helps these ideologies to flourish. Through romanticised narratives of domestic retreatism, the promotion of so-called traditional values, and the commandeering of viral social media trends and aesthetics, Tradwife influencers commodify and memify alt-right ideas, bringing them into the mainstream. They present a vision of retreating from the world's problems into a mythologised past, where feminine wives submit to and serve their masculine breadwinning husbands, and they sell this vision as liberation. It's important that we see beyond the aesthetics to the hypocrisy at the heart of this ideology, and oppose Tradwife influencers in recognition of their pivotal position within the rise of the far right. Thank you.
And now, cross the floor and give the call to the second proposition speaker to continue the case for Proposition Bench. Hear, hear.
Hello everyone, I'm Yusun. It's really nice to meet you in this lovely evening, and I'll just continue the discussion on this rise of Tradwife and also kind of the Tradwife movement to show why we need to oppose this cultural phenomenon, and also show that there are harms kind of brought by this Tradwife movement, and also provide some evidence to support our arguments. But after introducing this cultural phenomenon a little bit, I would like to situate our arguments in a global context, because this Tradwife movement is not only emerging in the West, it is also being translated into non-Western countries as well, and which actually stimulated larger scale feminist movements and also kind of resistance from women and also from progressive left-wing kind of politics. So a little bit more information on the Tradwife movement. The Tradwife aesthetic takes its prototype, the 1950s American housewife, reviving an image of traditional white femininity that idealizes women's supposed divine responsibilities as wives and mothers. So there is a religious background behind the rise of this Tradwife movement in the Western context. And it romanticizes a narrow, heteronormative, middle-class ideal ties to a nostalgic vision of past Western glories that's still very closely associated with this, the Western histories, While it may appear at first glance as a harmless lifestyle choice, it is deeply embedded in a broader reactionary push that has gained traction since the rise of the far-right populism. When we talk about Tradwife influences, that's really happened in the context of digital economy. So I also speak a little bit this influence from digital economy. Well then, Tradwives are not just women making private lifestyle choices. They have become a distinct type of lifestyle influencer within the digital economy, and some of them have already adopted this professional identity as digital influencers. So their social media presence is less about living authentically, but more about personal building strategies to really build a certain type of kind of persona to attract people's attention, to make profits, to run their business successfully. So these influencers perform authenticity in order to attract followers, particularly appealing to men and to women who seek validation in heteronormative ideals. In doing so, they generate clicks, views, kind of profits, to keep their business going. And then, for instance, on platforms like YouTube or Instagram, Tradwife influencers repeatedly display images of carefully curated domesticity, baking, cleaning, caring for children, and all those domestic labor and work, all while presenting a hyper-feminine self. This is so-called intentional femininity because they are performing that lifestyle, not necessarily meaning that they really embrace that lifestyle. So this intentional femininity is framed as an
Oh, it's a POI. I was going to ask a question, but
You don't have to accept the question.
you can just go like this if
One,
you don't want to.
Thank you. I will just continue
go ahead,
the discussion. Thank you. So this intentional femininity is framed as an alternative to liberal feminism. As we mentioned that they think that liberal feminism excludes the involvement of ordinary women, so they want to promote something alternative, and then they frame it as intentional femininity or intentional, or is this kind of Tradwife ideals to be an alternative to liberal feminism. Well then, instead of encouraging women to pursue careers, independence, equality, the Tradwife movement insists that true womanhood is found in marriage, in motherhood, and in submission. Of course, that's their way of framing of independence or equality or being feminism or being feminist. And then social media definitely plays an important role in the representation of these Tradwife ideals and gender ideologies. But then, since the mainstream media and also such as magazines or fashion, even some beauty products advertisements don't really provide a space to those traditional type of gender roles or conservative gender ideologies. Tradwife influencers, they turn to digital media sphere. They think digital media could open an alternative space for them to construct that Tradwife gender images and also recall that traditional gender ideologies. For instance, we say YouTube channels, they have the account of the Reading Wife, which brand themselves as models for feminine women who don't want to be a boss girl, who don't want to be that type of career woman. So those influencers claim to revise the notion of liberal feminism, arguing that they are offering a different kind of feminism that is compatible with traditional gender roles. But this is still built on a distorted understanding of feminism, one that misrepresents it as a right to family life rather than a fight for equality and choice. So their argument is built on a kind of wrong understanding of liberal feminism. And then ironically, while Tradwife's reject feminism's emphasis on women's empowerment, they simultaneously embrace the neoliberal ideal of the digital entrepreneur. They monetize their online image, becoming influencers who perform domestic family duties while benefiting from exactly that digital practices of being influencer, because that could bring them income, that could bring them revenues, economic benefits. And then based on those economic benefits, they are actually kind of having that type of some professional identity and also a career. And then we see a clear paradox. They frame domestic submission as personal liberation, while in reality, they are reproducing gender asymmetry and also gender hierarchies. Well, then the Tradwife trend is not confined to the to Western societies. In non-Western countries, we also see similar things emerging. For instance, in China, we are witnessing this parallel rise of 娇妻 discourses and 娇妻 influencers on social media. And that 娇妻 ideal type of womanhood or femininity portrays a delicate, thank you, sorry, I'll reject, sorry. So that 娇妻 kind of aesthetics portrays a delicate, devoted wife who loves her husband, happily submits to family life, to the male-dominated gender hierarchies, but at the same time, they are returning to families, giving up career chances, and also it's kind of it's a withdrawal from public life as well. And then this is not just a cultural thing, it's actually shaped by the logic of what scholars call therapeutical governance in post-socialist China. So this is also related to the policies of the party state, especially after these reformation and opening up policies. That is when neoliberal rationalities kind of being adopted by the Chinese government as a major governance ideology of the government. So that is a system that emphasizes personal resilience and individual adjustment while ignoring structural inequalities. It's very much similar to the rationale of neoliberalism in the West, which emphasizes on individual responsibility and to really also legitimate the retreat of the state welfare system. So we argue that there are real harms of this behind this trend of Tradwife movement. At the core, the Tradwife performativity glorifies an unrealistic domestic labor burden placed solely on women while normalizing men's absence from care and household responsibilities. And in the sense there are real harms. We see a lot of feminist movement and resistance emerging in Asian countries, particularly from Korea and China, and there are statistics showing in 10 years later, 50% of young population will reject marriage, and also the fertility rate will decline. Well, yeah, just a little bit of counter evidence. Well then, thank you for listening.
I thank the speaker for their excellent address.
That's right.
And now we cross the floor and give the call to the second opposition speaker to continue the case for opposition ban. Hear, hear.
As a woman, my confidence is frequently mistaken for arrogance, my passion for aggression, and my intellect for some form of intimidation tactic against some insecure man. My whole life, I've been told that I should want to marry a rich, attractive man. I should have 2 kids, a dog, a white picket fence, and this is something that I should desire for the rest of my life. My place should be at the home. I might be able to have a little retail job on the side. This is a narrative that I'm told throughout my whole entire life. As a child, I was encouraged to learn how to cook and clean to a much greater extent than my brother. He can't do anything in the house. And then I saw girls being steered into like textiles classes and things like that, and boys going into stuff like product design. I was never taught to challenge this. I never had the ability to challenge this. Misogyny and sexism are absolutely everywhere in society. This is conceded on the whole of GovBench. They tell you that that's true. And I think that they're so baked into society that they just can't really be the metric that you judge this debate on, because I don't think it's something that is exclusive to Tradwives in the way that they want to tell you it is. I think it's about, the debate isn't actually about whether the concept of a Tradwife is good or bad. It's more like domestic subjugation is something that has just existed for centuries. It's something that's going to continue to exist because of cultural norms, economic inequalities, like religious practices that are far older than TikTok and far older than social media platforms that we're debating today. I think the real question of this debate is to do with the rise of these influences, the rise of these individuals, and that the visibility of whether the visibility of these Tradwife influences existing is better or worse than the silence that we had before. On opposition, I'm literally all I'm going to say to you is visibility is better than invisibility for these people. Influence means discourse, it means monetization, it means accountability, reclamation of repressive narratives and structures, and these are all just things that mean that we shouldn't oppose this rise of Tradwife influences. And I think that government's world just erases that visibility and pretends that the patriarchy is just going to completely vanish and disappear the second that these individuals log out of TikTok. Massive spoiler alert for you guys, patriarchy doesn't disappear when you log out of TikTok. Okay, number one benefit is visibility that therefore leads to discourse. Okay, so I think the first benefit of this rise is that it generates a level of exposure and discourse that we wouldn't otherwise have. Like, let's be honest, Tradwife content is weird, it's cringe, most of all, it's massively entertaining. This probably means that people, like, Proposition concede this, they tell you that it's a load of fun and it's something that they enjoy to watch. And I think it therefore sparks conversation because it's a bit freaky. When you watch a Nara Smith TikTok, everybody knows who Nara Smith is, I assume, she's nuts. Like, I don't think anybody's saying, like, wow, I want to live like Nara Smith, she's really fucking cool, it's really cool. Sorry, Mom. What they're actually saying is, wait, what the hell does her husband do all day other than stare at me with his creepy blue eyes? Like, that's what they're saying. They ask what Lucky Blue Smith is doing while she works creating yogurt, which is something I didn't even know you could do. That moment, that pause of disbelief, that understanding that her husband is having to be doing something else is enough of a question and enough of a response that people are going to be going in her comment section and saying these sorts of things to her. Okay, in the 1950s, Tradwives were invisible, they were locked in suburbs where no one was able to like question the system that they were in, they just kind of were accepted that this is what they had to do. In 2025, they're stitched, they're parodied, they're fact-checked, they're dragged across a For You page. The visibility reframes domesticity, not as a default expectation, but more of like an aesthetic type of thing, something that can therefore be challenged because it is framed as this aesthetic in the first place. It can also be memed, it can be mocked. And I think social media is just a unique way to be able to do this, because I think there's quite a low barrier to be able to create a social media like account or platform and to be able to challenge it. It's much harder to challenge things like politics. It's much easier to be able to challenge just an individual that's on TikTok or something like that. And I think you compare this to like other aspirational niches that exist on TikTok, like you've got like your hustle bros, you've got that girl routines, crypto kings, like the guys who like eat raw eggs at 2 o'clock in the morning and then they go for a 5K run and it's weird. I think they're often male-coded fantasies that just don't have the same level of like backlash and response or critique. People are kind of like, oh my god, he's really cool. I think what's different about Tradwife influencers is that they actually do exist in a chamber of feminist pushback. And the reason I'm telling you this is I think it's proof that visibility doesn't mean direct endorsement of these ideologies. You can still criticize them in this way, as is shown by Tradwife culture. And I think the discourse means that young women get to see these roles, they then get to laugh at them, they get to debate them, and then they ultimately have the ability to be able to choose that this is something that they don't want in their life because they're able to see that it is a choice that they can make. I think a more extreme impact of it probably comes from the ability of these influencers also to be able to highlight certain abusive things and certain like inappropriate things that are happening in their home life. I think an eager-eyed viewer would notice that some Tradwife influencers maybe pulled her hair in front of her face in a way that she didn't normally do. And because they're aware of this individual, they're aware that this is something incorrect, after a little bit of online digging, they realise that something isn't going quite right in this person's life. And so I think it can also be used by individuals as some form of cry for help and some form of way to be able to recognise these abuse cycles that exist. I think that it creates things like spin-off shows like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and although they're not exclusively Tradwifey, I think what they do is they further show like what people would and wouldn't stand for in relationships, and also what sort of religions and cultures this ideology is stemming from, in order so that they're more aware and more informed of where this is coming from and why it exists in the first place. So I think that when something is public, it's just easier to be contested, and when it's hidden, it's just going to fester to a greater degree. So that's why we just get a greater level of discourse when you have Tradwife influences existing. And I think this is just a good thing to happen for a lot of young women in the world who need to be able to have this platform to be able to discuss these sorts of things. Secondly, about monetization of domestic labour and why this is actually just good for the Tradwife influencers in general, because I've talked a lot about like, how other people are going to engage with it. I'm just going to tell you why it's actually good for Tradwife influencers too. I think that the influencer culture allows women to monetize previously invisible and thankless tasks. I think for centuries, cooking, cleaning, childcare, everything to do with domestic labour, they've all just been obligations rather than skills. It isn't seen that you're good at something, it's seen as it's something you should do, as something that you've just been born with an innate ability to be able to turn on an oven and put a pizza in it. And I think influencer culture changes that. Suddenly, when you spend 6 hours cooking a meal, you don't just get a grunt from your husband and it's something that's expected of you. You get 600,000 views, you get a brand deal from KitchenAid, and you get the ability to be able to make some form of money from this thing that you spent quite a lot of time doing. I think that labour is aestheticised, professionalised, weaponised, but also paid, which is just something that you don't get when this influential culture doesn't exist. I don't think it means that you're like glorifying oppression and things like that, because I think you're acknowledging the endless hours of work. No, typically female jobs in the home are the ones that never end. It's the pile of laundry that you can never possibly finish because you've got the clothes on your body that you can never wash unless you do your laundry naked like a freak. It's the things like dishes where they mound up over and over again after every single meal and you have to wash them over and over and over again. They're the typically female jobs in the household that never have an end to them. However, male jobs in the household are one and done. Typical male, but it's things like DIY, it's all those sorts of stuff where you can just point at something that you put up on a wall and then it's like, well done, you did a domestic labour. So I think that even if men are working in the home and are doing some form of domestic labour, I still don't think that the stuff they're doing is that difficult. And what actually changes is when this is on social media and when it is being put in front of people, they're actually just able to see that that women are doing immense levels of labour and hard work and that these tasks do never end. It's just easier for them to be able to see this and it's better recognition. Tradwife influencers may romanticize it a little bit, but in doing so they professionalise it and they show the importance and the cogs of the household machine that just otherwise wouldn't be recognised. Okay then, I'm going to use the stupid BP word, but I'll explain what the BP word means. What's the comparative in this debate, guys? And that's basically what I'm telling you, is what would happen if these influences didn't exist. As in, if this rise didn't happen, and why, if this rise didn't happen, why is this actually just worse? So I think that in Gov's world, the idea of women leaving the workforce, doing disproportionate amounts of domestic labour just aren't new. It comes from things like childcare costs and equal pay, gender norms, and all the other reasons I've already given you. So none of that vanishes when you ban Tradwife influencers, when Tradwife influencers don't exist. These things are still going to happen. And patriarchy doesn't really wait around for a TikTok tutorial to get itself started. It's kind of already there. So I think that in Gov's world, women still marry men who expect them to cook and clean. They still juggle jobs with childcare. They still feel invisible, undervalued, under-recognised. What's the difference there? They don't get a brand deal, they don't get the followers, they don't get the memes, they don't get the feminist stitches, they don't get any of the recognition that I've already told you about, they don't get any of the discourse off the back of the lives that they live, they don't get any of this sort of stuff. I think historically the invisibility is exactly what allowed abuse and resentment to fester, because people weren't aware of what these women were doing, both in terms of how they were being treated by their partners, but also just the actual work that was going in, which meant they were more likely to have to do things like take up a second job, because people didn't see domestic labour as a job in and of itself, which meant that they had to do the double shift, they had to do all of this doubling stuff, which government tell you is like a bad thing. I think this is less likely to happen when Tradwife influencers exist, because it's recognised as a lot of hard work and that they shouldn't also be expected to do a job on top of that. I think this is just, Gov's world is the same, you just get unpaid labour. I think this is quite unpleasant for these women. Okay, a tiny bit of responsiveness, I guess, and then I will finish and I will sit back down. So I think a couple of generally preemptive stuff for what's going to come out of some fall speeches. I think number one is that algorithms don't work like manifestos, so I think that people don't watch one bread making video and decide to quit their jobs and frolic in a field of whatever. So I think they just consume the content like entertainment to an extent that they can engage with, but not like a binding lifestyle contract. And second of all, it's visibility exposes contradictions, like I've already said about Nara Smith's partner. We see Tradwife husbands doing nothing, and we ask what is their role here. It sparks conversations about labour fairness and and just the equality that exists within a household. I think invisibility just does not give you this. I think also there's just is freedom of choice stuff. Feminism isn't, feminism isn't just about forcing women into boardrooms, it's also just about respecting the choices that they make. Even if those choices are domestic, we would just prefer that they make those domestic choices and they also have the ability to get paid in this kind of way. So I think that overall, my case is quite simple. It's not exactly the same as Nathan's case, but that's fine. I think what it basically comes down to is in our world, visibility creates discourse, memes, stitches, critiques. I think it also shows that domestic labour is monetised, recognised, and professionalised. It's something that is seen as a good. Tradwife influencers are becoming a conscious label, which makes them easier to contest because you can point your finger at the thing that you have an issue with in a household, which is a Tradwife. So I think in Gov's world, women still do the labour, they do it silently. They lose visibility, they lose revenue, they lose accountability that comes with putting yourself online. Tradwives don't disappear in Gov's world. they lose Wi-Fi, which means no memes, no critiques, no receipts. So this is the choice that I'm presenting you guys, and this is how I think you should actually just vote in this round debate. Do you want the invisible oppression of the 1950s? Or do you want the messy, meme-filled, brand sponsorship discourse of 2025, where these people have some form of reclamation to structures that have fucked them over, screwed them over, time and time and time again? I don't think you defeat the patriarchy by cancelling sourdough content. I think what you actually do is you defeat it by making the bread, eating the bread, getting monetized, billing KitchenAid. For all those reasons, proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for their excellent address, and indeed thank you to all our speakers for what has been an excellent debate so far. It is now time to open the debate to the floor, which means the audience. So everyone in attendance has the opportunity to give a brief speech. Looking at how much time we have left, 1 minute each on the speeches. If you would like to give a speech, just raise your hand nice and high so that I can see it. I will bang my gavel continuously when your time has expired. This week, the best floor speech will receive a prize, which is both a small trophy and a £15 voucher to IJ Mellis. So there's some incentive. Before your speech, see, IJ Mellis is very popular. Before your speech, if you wouldn't mind stating your name very clearly so that it can go into our minutes. Our minutes stretch back about 200 years, and it would be a shame if your name doesn't get entered alongside your contribution. If you are not happy with your contribution afterwards and you'd like it deleted from our recording of the debate, then do not hesitate to come up and we will cut out your contribution. So it is now time for floor speeches. Does anyone have a contribution? All right, fantastic. We'll go right at the back in the center.
Hello, my name is Maxime, and I had a question for the proposition, specifically the first speaker who centered on Western ideas. My question was, if we think about this Western idea that we were focusing on for Tradwives, that we live in Western society right now, where there's a lot of people who actually can't, we can accept that there are women who want to be Tradwives, but to be a Tradwife, as you said, is a privileged position. It's a position where you need a partner that makes enough money for you not to be in the workforce. So I would say that there's an imbalance in power here, where actually the proposition, if you don't want to be a Tradwife, you can just enter the workforce. However, if you want to be a Tradwife, you need someone who can make enough money to not be a Tradwife. So I see that there's a privileged position in Tradwifism, and that actually it's harder to be Tradwife than to just work. And also, I feel like the proposition there's an absolute mention of
Yes, on the corner.
Hello. So I'm Susan, for the minute. Yes. So I would like to first preamble by saying that I do not agree, myself personally, with the Tradwife content. However, I do want to question the government's assumption that the negative ideology of Tradwife influencers directly leads us to oppose them. I do not agree with this ideology, and many of you may not also agree with this ideology. However, it is fair to say that among the 8 billion people in the world, 100 of them will find community and support and some kind of help within this space. They might find this community and support in a place in their life when life is just difficult, when they need this sort of space, and this is just the first sort of online presence they come into. And so I would argue that these 100 people are worth keeping with this content, even though it's questionable, even though it might lead them to internalize sexism. In the moment, it might also lead them to say not to commit suicide, or not self-harm, or not lead to other, even more hurtful ways, like say just far-right extremism, just outright. So I would argue that these 100 lives are worth this questionable online presence, and how people do the same.
On the corner here.
record. I'm Francesca. I'd like to speak against the opposition today, especially in their argument about how visibility in 2025 is much more powerful and allows women a certain level of access and community and allows them to be part of something. A recent article has come out about Ballerina Farm, a extremely notable Tradwife, and what the interviewer was allowed private access into her home life. And what they found out is that every aspect of her life she was isolated and forced into being a mother and a child rearer and catering for her an heir of $1 billion plane franchise. And what they found with her is that she was in fact extremely lonely, extremely isolated. She did not truly actually have a voice. She was actually more part of a movement. And as being part of a movement, it's not about that identity, it's not about being a Tradwife, it's about serving a higher purpose.
Directed towards Abbie. It sounded almost to me like you were presenting a false dichotomy, in that you were arguing that we should have the rise of Tradwives, or that it would be an issue if we didn't have the rise of Tradwives, because what we would be left with is women being unseen. And that may be true, but can you argue against the rise of Tradwives because it just might be worse if they didn't exist? That seems a bit speculative to me. I think you would have to argue for the rise of Tradwives because there's something, or you'd have to endorse it because something about it's worth endorsing. But it sounded to me that you are primarily endorsing it because you thought it would be worse if they didn't exist. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. It might be, but I think that's not necessarily true.
I see we have a lot of speeches. I will try to get to everyone. Everyone will have 1 minute. I think unfortunately we will slightly run out of time before we can get to everyone, but do please stick your hand up if you want to contribute. We'll go to this side. No, behind you. Yeah.
For the record, my name is Susanna. I did want to ask the proposition, how does this contend with the rise of the far right and their ideals of lessened free speech? If we are to ban Tradwife movements, I think we only fall into the ideals of a far right free speech, only hearing exactly what we want to hear, especially as we see news coming out of the US with anything that is anti the current regime being taken down. I would like to know how Proposition would respond to the infringement on free speech that would only further fall into the Tradwife Christian nationalist far-right movement.
Go with that. Yeah.
For the record, I'm Serena, and my question is to the opposition. How would you respond to the argument that women have been working to try to get payment for their unpaid labor for a very long time? Do you think that the approach to letting it be up to, let's say, the market or the internet, for brand sponsorships, things like that, it should be left up to that instead of taking a more systemic approach to social change and policy change?
We'll go with here. Yeah, on the back row.
My name is Barish for the minutes, and I sort of had a question for proposition. Like, as government, you feel like you guys have like a bigger burden than opposition to sort of prove why Tradwifes like are a net negative. And I feel like I didn't really see an argument other than it's icky and I don't like it, right? This sort of felt like an argument of feelings as opposed to facts, and I don't really see how proposition is able to properly stake out their argument that Tradwifes are something so negative that the government should oppose it, as opposed to just something that general society doesn't like, but there's a lot of things we don't like. There's a lot of things that we've let happen on the internet, and why shouldn't Tradwives just be one of those?
Just a quick point to opposition about the falsehood thing. You tell us that Tradwives do not act badly because we have no good reason to think that they are false. And I accept that maybe they are not lying about their happiness, but proposition has sort of set up that they are being false by misrepresenting liberal feminism or a feminist agenda, and they're being false by misrepresenting their influencer labor as leisure. And I would like to see some sort of response to that as to why that should not be considered acting badly. Also, in terms of harm, I think monetizing the domestic labor through an influencer avenue is a good argument, but it's only available to certain people who, influencers, we've got a definition from Prop. They are heteronormative, they're white, they're thin, they subscribe to a certain privileged class, and I think exclusion is harmful.
From board, Ksenia.
First, I'd like to say thank you to everybody who came to today. The speech has been wonderful so far. I have a question to either to both sides. Firstly, to the opposition. I think you guys have made a lot of your points on the idea that this would be something that will create a lot of outcry. As many of the politicians have brought up before, this is something that has been outcried before. My question is, why is this necessarily going to create a negative response rather than a normalization, or a response that veers towards normalization, which I think is a strong push from government. Towards the government, I think that your arguments have been very strong so far, and I really appreciate them. But I would be really interested to hear more about how these content is internalized. Because I think the opposition does bring up a very valid point, that a lot of people do view this material as somewhat trivial. So the question is, why are influencers uniquely important to causing people to internalize these harmful messages, rather than simply just an element of the movement existing? Thank you so much for all the speeches. I look forward to the rest of the debate.
Ariel.
Hi. I have 2 points. Firstly, just to the opposition, there's one thing I dislike when talking about the marriage statistics. Happiness in marriage is not the same as influences, and I don't really like the conflation that's being used there. Second of all, I think what's really interesting when we're considering the far-right pipeline is that it's not Tradwives that are the problem. The key thing that the far-right pipeline loves is the idea of submission. And I think you can see that in a lot of the hypocrisy in things like your Fox News Media or your recent reform campaign, in which women who are actually presenting the girl boss stereotype are considered acceptable and equivocal to the Tradwife stereotype because they're considered submissive to the movement. So I really think in this debate we should all consider that the issue is female submission that they're looking for to certain ideals, rather than how that submission appeals and acts, which is why we shouldn't be quick to judge Tradwives themselves, because they're no different to any other cooking or home life influencing. We should just be very careful of what the underlying message, which in my opinion is submission, that some of them come with. Thank you.
Well, there's nothing particularly unique about Tradwives. We can lump them in with a general nostalgia that has always been part of political and social life. Nowadays, this nostalgia can be seen particularly strongly for the 50s and 60s. You can see it in the UK with colonial imperial nostalgia, over in France, nostalgerie, and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter is that these are the reactionary parts of society. And this nostalgia is both based on a completely imaginary past, and it is pernicious. But then again, when reaction reaches quite high levels, I would say that history has taught us that it means that what they're reacting towards is at its dying moments. There is no dichotomy between 2025 or the 1950s, because now the 1950s are well and truly over, thank the Lord, and they are not coming back. So this is maybe a more optimistic point to this. Thank you.
Thank Thank you to everyone who's contributed. I've seen a couple of extra hands around the room, and I'm afraid we have to move on with the debate, but we will have hopefully a little bit of time after the debate where you can all come and discuss these ideas further at our social. So it is now time to bring the debate back to the dispatch boxes. Each bench has a total of 10 minutes, and they can split it in whatever manner they like. And so I give the call to the opposition bench to give their reply. Here, here.
Yeah.
5.5.
5.5, yeah, 5.5.
Whole extra 30 seconds, let's go.
I was generous.
Thank you, Nathan. I'll pay you afterwards. Right, okay, I'm just going to go full speech by full speech, the ones that are related to us. Number one, Francesca on the idea of being like isolated and forced to care and stuff like that. I think that's probably going to happen either way. They're probably going to struggle to find community either way. I'd rather than be able to have a paycheck and be able to buy their way out of the oppressive structures and systems that they're in as a result of being an influencer than to have nothing at all and still exist in these things. So I think this does just exist either way, regardless of whether they're a Tradwife influencer or not. Then on, I think your name was Anastasia, you remembered my name and now I can't remember yours, that's really bad, sorry. About like why it would be worse if it didn't exist and why this is how I've chosen to phrase the debate. I think number one is the motion is this house opposes Tradwife influencers, not this house opposes Tradwives. So therefore, what we are talking about is Tradwife influencers, not just Tradwives in general. So that's the reason that I've done that. But also, I've kind of already explained why, in a world where Tradwife influencers don't exist, Tradwife ideology and Tradwife culture would still proliferate. It just wouldn't be called Tradwiving, it'd be called being a woman. It'd be called staying at home, it'd be called doing all these sorts of things. And I've already told you why that's the case, but I'll tell you again. Societal norms that exist, cultural inequalities that exist, things that are so baked into society that you don't recognise them. I told you the story about how my brother basically can't do any domestic labour himself. That is just something that is normalised, it's something that would exist independent. It would be something that would exist if these Tradwife influencers weren't around. I think I've done a reasonable job of already explaining to you why this is the case, but that's another answer to your question. Then we have Serena who says like, oh, well, should we leave it to social media? And Nathan's done a bit on this. I'm going to give you a different reason as to why I think it's important that social media is the platform that actually pays these people. It's because nobody else will. Women are already struggling to get equal wages in the workplace. They're already struggling to get into positions of authority and power within the workplace. They already don't have access to the same systems that men have access to. So I don't understand why there'd be any world in which any government or any individual or anywhere other than social media is going to turn around and go, this labour that you've been expected to do for years and years and years that we've never paid you before, we're going to pay for you, pay for you now. If women had equal rights and all equal wages, go ahead, but that's not the world that we live in. I think that social media is the unique place where this can happen. I've already told you why there's a low barrier to entry, but I do just think that social media is the best place for this to happen. I think it's the only place that this can happen because it's not going to exist in society otherwise. Next on Ksenia with your lovely question. Thank you so much about why instead of it being, you basically push the idea that instead of it being like outrage and frustration, it's just going to be normalization and desensitization, correct? Smash. Okay. I think that the reason why this just isn't true is because of the nature of social media algorithms. Boring tradwives aren't going to get platformed, boring tradwives aren't going to get the views because they aren't going to be promoted by the algorithm. So if you're a tradwife that's just doing the same generic stuff over and over and over again, people aren't going to see you. So what it creates is an effect on social media where you're forced to do increasingly sort of more interesting or more controversial things in order to take up space on the algorithm, in order to get pulled through and in order to be shown to an audience. These more severe and more like, I don't know, tradwifey things or leaning into these sorts of ideologies and these sorts of things are the things that are going to create outrage. It's just the way that social media works, which means that in order for these people to get platformed, they have to do this stuff, and that's why you're going to get a level of outrage. That social media doesn't allow for people to become desensitized and normalized, because if people are desensitized and normalized, they log off, which is the absolute opposite of what social media platforms want. So I think that people will change their content in order to stay relevant, and the way that they change their content is to find their new niche and find something that's different and find something that people want to engage with. So it'll just create outrage at some point, because there's going to be a point where they're going to find the bottom of the race and they're going to do something that is going to create this outrage and discourse. I don't think social media allows for normalization. What does actually allow for normalization is a society where these influences don't exist, and it's just something that the individuals are expected to do. Okay, a couple of things then on prop, because I didn't actually mention much of what prop said in my speech. But I think that number one is there's just other ways to push ideology and inequalities in the world. I don't think it's unique to social media. I don't think it's unique to Tradwives. I don't think it's unique to this debate. On the stuff about the manosphere and like people buying in, I think that there's still a desire for Tradwife type individuals in the manosphere, regardless of if they're influencers or not. So manosphere individuals are still going to try and promote this ideology regardless. The difference is you need feminist critique of these sort of Tradwife influencers, which I've already told you as to why you get this feminist critique of Tradwife influencers. That's just something that you need in order to be able to combat the manosphere in this kind of way. And I just think this is just a better way to do this. On the idea of it being Eurocentric, we spoke about Nora Smith. Has anybody got a picture of what Nora Smith looks like in their head? Is Nora Smith white? No. So I think all the stuff about like Eurocentric, Nora Smith is German, Nora Smith is non-white. And so I think that the idea of them being Eurocentric is just a way to be able to kind of like blanket approach this debate, or blanket approach any debate on individuals of like some form of privileged position. But I think because of the way that social media works, it doesn't actually matter what you look like. What matters is the content you create, as I've already said in the response to Ksenia's question. So I think that it isn't actually as Eurocentric and as heteronormative as prop want to claim, because I just don't think that's the way that social media works. And I think that Nora Smith is just a glorious example of why this isn't true. Lastly, on about like the fact that people find womanhood in submission and all this sort of stuff that comes out of the tail end of Prop 2 speech. This is another thing that exists either way. I think that a lot of this debate is just these things can exist on either side. There's no clear reason as to why this is specific to Tradwife influences. I think that the speech that I give is the only one that actually explains why this stuff is unique to Tradwife influencers due to the monetization platforms of social media and to do with the discourse that you get. Thank you all for listening. I've had a lot of fun, and yeah, I hope you vote up. Thank you.
I thank the speakers for their excellent reply, and now give the call to the proposition bench to conclude the debate. Hear, hear.
Hello again. Thank you for the 4 speeches. They were all really interesting, and yeah, I've had a lot of fun. I think I'm going to address quite a few of the comments with one point, because quite a lot of you refer to this idea, and the opposition has talked about it a lot as well, of like what happens to kind of choice, autonomy, free speech, things like that if you advocate for getting rid of tradwives. Although, I mean, it's the rise of tradwives rather than tradwives per se, but yeah, like if you get rid of them, like what does that do to like choice and autonomy? And I think something that's really important to state about like this side of the argument is that choice in terms of like feminism and gender equality, choice, the idea that a woman, an individual woman choosing whatever she wants to do with her life, and that being feminism, is not feminism. That is not addressing structural inequalities. It ignores, you know, intersectionality. It's what you were saying about it's a kind of neoliberal feminism where individual choice is the kind of the only thing you've got to challenge any kind of structural inequalities. It ignores any kind of solidarity, any kind of intersectional oppression. You know, the assumption that any woman is free to choose whatever lifestyle she wants is hugely based on an assumption of privilege. You know, feminism is about the women who don't have freedom of choice. And kind of related to that, there was the point about like what influence exactly does this media have over people? You know, quite a few of you are saying, can we not just have it, and why does watching it and laughing at it or whatever actually translate into kind of real life people's opinions? And I think it's really important to recognise the influence that media and culture has over everyday decisions. You know, our choices aren't made in a vacuum, which is another issue with this thing of free choice equals good. Our choices are not made, in a vacuum. They are based on the things we consume, the people we speak to, culture, society, media. And, you know, to take a specific example, like you only have to look at the direct translation of the consumption of violent misogyny online, manosphere content, into the direct violence against women and girls in real life. You know, that is happening. The things that people consume online do translate into real life societal impact. So I think it's really important to consider that you know, media is not just something that you consume in a bubble and then you go away and it has no influence over you. Like, we are seeing in real life the consequences of some of those really harmful alt-right ideas in real life. And I think, that kind of addresses this thing as well, the point over here about, like, you know, if 100 people are watching Tradwife content and feeling comforted by it, like, is that not fine? Is that not worth it? I think it's not about the 100 people and those small Tradwife influencers like that they're watching. It's about the wider influence. It's about this wider kind of alt-right sphere and the influence it has that tradwives are sitting within. And a lot of people who are watching that kind of content maybe aren't necessarily aware of that, but again, it's like the cultural significance and the real world impacts that can have. So we should also be questioning, why are we finding comfort in that kind of content? Again, like it comes back to that idea of what exactly is choice and autonomy. It is not made in a vacuum. And I'll just finish off because I want to give some time to you as well. Undermining the influence of media on choice, we don't want to do that. I think this idea, is visibility better than not as well? Like this idea of if we take away tradwife content at all, like is that a bad thing to not have the visibility? There's also the other side of visibility, which is, popular feminism equals a lot of the time popular misogyny. The visibility of these women online also opens themselves up to online violence and, being subjects of attack themselves. So visibility is not necessarily a safe or good thing. I'll just leave it there. Sorry, that was a bit scatterbrained, but really enjoyed listening to all your comments and the speeches. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all these interesting questions and also really good points from the audience. And also, I also enjoy this kind of inspirations from the counter arguments. We try to summarize some of the major points. I think from the counter arguments, they were more like saying this type of business is not really doing harm to this kind of economy or the existing status quo, and then there should be some space for this type of digital culture to exist. I think this is actually a complex issue that's related to internet governance. Ideologically, we oppose these type of populist and misogynist ideas. We think I think most of us actually agree there are harms that will be brought by this type of populist misogyny and this type of reactionary politics. Well, then, does that equal that the government has to ban the content on internet? I think that's a more complicated issue related to internet governance. But we say there are some risks that those type of content will impact people's understanding about kind of gender relations, or especially for children and teenagers, when they don't have that mature understanding about gender relations yet. It's very much easily they will be influenced by those kind of fairy tale or fantasies created by Tradwife influencers, because Tradwife influencers do have a positive and happy sensibilities or that emotions represented in those content. It's a little bit similar to those fairy tale stories like the princess and also prince. So do we really want to say that's the thing teenagers and kind of children, boys and girls, that's the way they think about their future, or it's their way of understanding different gender images, or kind of even imagining themselves? I would think there are some risks and also negative impact on that. So I kind of agree that the government needs to better regulate this type of content, but may not necessarily meaning they need to ban and also censor those content, cause that kind of censorship, I do agree, it's a kind of violation of free speech. But at the same time, there might be some needs for the government to clarify their regulatory policies regarding this type of content, especially thinking about the impact on children and teenagers, or, for governance issues, the government needs to consult the public. They really need to invite the community members to discuss the things together, and then to show what might be the pros and what might be the cons, and how do you think a digital space, kind of healthy and also more supportive digital space looks like. So I think for the government, they need to engage the public in that part of the governance process. That's kind of what we want to share. But thank you all for your questions, and also, we enjoy the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our speakers, and indeed all members of the House, for contributing to the fine debate this evening. It is now time to call the House to a vote. So, please raise your hand nice and high, and please keep it up if you side with the proposition, that is, if you oppose the rise of Tradwife influences. Nice and high, please.
It makes no sense. We always have to remind ourselves to get time to it, because it's you should look away.
And now raise your hand nice and high if you side with the opposition, that is, if you do not oppose the rise of Tradwife influences. And do we have any abstentions?
Yeah, but they don't choose it.
Okay, we will now have some brief announcements from the board. Starting with Beata, maybe.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone, today. Thank you so much to our wonderful speakers for what has been a truly fantastic debate. Thank you so much for Abbie. We love hearing you speak, and if you want to, well, no, that's actually your part, sorry. Next week, week 4, we have a panel on the oil exploration in Buchanan Hall, because this hall is full. So join us next week at 7:40. The doors will open and the debate starts at 8 o'clock in Buchanan Hall.
Ariel.
Thank you guys for a fantastic debate. That was really exciting. If you want to talk about this topic more, we'll be going to Beacon to the Top Floor Union immediately after to have a drink and continue this conversation. I would love to see as many of you there as possible. If that's not up to speed, well, on Saturday we have our UDS famous pub crawl, which is an experience some would describe as violent, others would describe as fun. If you're interested, please keep an eye out on our social media. It comes with a bunch of rules and fun little competitions, and we'll be meeting at 8 o'clock at the rules, so keep that all in mind. And besides that, see you at Beacon.
Any other members of the board? Perhaps Abbie, you have anything for
Pardon?
Anything for competitive?
Well, yeah, I do it every week.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why I got confused because just
Nah, it's okay. Hi guys, I'm Abbie again, and I'm the head of competitive. Yay! Yes, correct answer. So a couple of things from me. Number one is obviously we have our internal cups this weekend before the pub crawl. A lot of you guys have already signed up for that. If you're not in the group chat or you have any questions or you would like to sign up for it, give me a shout and I'll hopefully be able to answer them. Secondly is obviously we have our novice training every week, top floor of the union, 2 p.m, Wednesdays, large rehearsal room. I think that's all the information needed. And you should absolutely come along. I'd just like to say that this is my third year in the society, and my goal coming into it was to be able to speak at a public debate like this, because it's something I never thought I'd be able to do in a million years. Speaking in front of 5 people was something that terrified me, and I think there's about 160 of you in here. So I think this is testament of what the society can do for you, and I absolutely recommend you coming along because it's an incredible experience. I've enjoyed today, even though, spoiler alert, we've absolutely lost the debate. But I recommend you do it. It's a very good experience, and you too one day can lose a public debate in front of 160 people. Thank you.
Before we announce the results of the debate, it is time to give the floor speech prize. This week's winner of the floor speech prize is Anastasia. Please come up. I've realised we don't have the voucher quite yet. It's in a box, but we'll get it to you. Well, we'll just announce the results of the debate anyhow and sort them in a second. So the ayes to the right are 67 and the nays to the left are 50. Therefore, the ayes have it, the ayes have it.